TBC Classic is finally here, and with it comes so many new things. New dungeons, new quests, new raids, and a whole new world to explore. And in the last two videos, we worked on hitting level 70. If you haven't watched them already, I will leave a link on the screen now. But with us now being max level, it's time for us to finish off the rep grinds and get that pre-bis gear, all in preparation for my first ever TBC raid. And honestly, I cannot wait to see Karazhan for my first time ever. So starting things off, we're going straight into the deep end with this one, because this was literally 5 minutes after I hit level 70, and we're going into my first ever heroic dungeon, and it's the Black Morass. Definitely not the wisest first heroic dungeon, as I was about to find out. Now, like I said in the last video, the Black Morass really isn't all that fun to do. I still really like the whole time traveling thing, because it allows players to visualize parts of the past. But the way this one plays out just isn't really it. You're literally just running back and forth from portals opening, slaying identical mobs. However, this is the heroic version, and I'm told this is one of the harder ones too, which we found out at only the second portal, because the tank got absolutely smacked and so did the warrior. But thanks to my amazing bear tanking skills, we were luckily able to make a recovery. Now, in terms of the loot, this dungeon was actually a pretty huge one. First of all, every single heroic boss drops a badge of justice, a brand new currency that can be exchanged for very, very powerful gear. But not only that, the last boss of this dungeon, Aeonis, can drop the Girdle of the Death Dealer. It's a heroic only piece of gear that gives 28 agility, 20 hit, and 56 attack power. This thing is so insanely good that it's not just pre-bis, it's phase 1 bis. So out of all of the pieces of gear that we were going to be chasing, this is probably the most important one. So apart from that little hiccup on Portal 2, things were going very smoothly. We even managed to take down the first boss, Chrono Lord Dea, who awarded us with our first ever badge of justice, as well as this very solid tanking cloak. And the same thing goes, the next few portals were very easy, no issues at all. But that's when things came crumbling down. We were on the second boss, Temperus, who is the hardest boss in the dungeon, because he gets this buff called Hasten, which increases melee damage by 200%. And of course on heroic difficulty with a bunch of fresh 70s, that's pretty scary, so it needs to be purged. Unfortunately though, I don't think our healer realized that, and that caused us to wipe. So we all rushed back in an attempt to save Medivh, and luckily we were able to clean up the little ads and re-engage the boss in time. And this time, things were going great, except Medivh went to 1 HP because the next portal actually spawned whilst we were trying to kill the second boss. So we had no choice but to simply let Medivh die and then wait 5 minutes for him to reset. And unfortunately, that meant that we had to start the entire encounter from the very first portal, which I thought would be fine since I wanted the badge of justice anyway. But of course, that's not how it worked, and killing the first boss awards us with literally nothing. So moving on to our third Temperus attempt, I was told by the tank to kill the ads, so that's what I did. In my opinion, I think I could have just let the ads pass and then we nuke the boss, but I'm not one to argue. But again, we ended up dying because apparently the purge wasn't working. But again, that led to the death of Medivh, and we all agreed to give it one last attempt, and if we weren't successful this time, we would just call it. So for the final time, we killed Chrono Lord Dea, cleared up the portals, and started to take down Temperus. But this time, everything went smoothly. Hasten was purged, the tank didn't get one shot, and I stayed on the boss the entire time, and we were able to take him down. And doing that felt fantastic. That was until I remembered that this wasn't even the last boss. And in the normal version, the last boss is by far the scariest and hardest hitting, so I can only imagine what this boss is like on heroic difficulty. Luckily though, myself and the tank had a load of free action potions on us, which is a potion that does exactly what it sounds like. Makes us immune to all stuns, meaning we were able to completely skip the boss's mechanic. And sure, things got a little close at some points, but in the end, we were successful at taking Aeonis down. And he dropped the Girdle of Valorous Deeds, which is the completely wrong belt. But you know what? The tank needed the belt, and honestly, I'd say well deserved, because without this guy guiding us through it all, we would never have been able to clear it. So with our first ever heroic dungeon now completed, I decided to jump into my second ever heroic dungeon. Now at this point, I only had Caverns of Time attuned and the Cenarian Expedition attuned, so I decided to hop into a run of the Underbog, and to my surprise, surprise, I instantly got invited to this group. Now, one thing that I really like about Heroics so far is that it gives us a reason to go back to what is essentially just a leveling dungeon. One of my favourite dungeons in Vanilla WoW was Magtheridon, but past that 5-level gap, there really isn't any reason to go back to it. But being able to go back to the likes of Underbog and have a chance at getting epic quality items and badges of justice, it felt awesome. Up first on the list of bosses is Hungerfen. Just like the normal version of this dungeon though, I didn't really notice any mechanics. I can only really assume that this is a tank fight. For his loot though, he dropped the Hungertide gauntlets, and of course, gave us our 4th badge of justice. But on the topic of loot though, it's worth noting that there is 0 pieces of loot for us here. But that's the other great thing. It doesn't matter, because we still get badges of justice and progress towards exalted reputation. So no matter what dungeon I did, I really didn't care. I also got a taste of just how hard hitting heroic dungeons really are, because we were killing a bog giant and I accidentally ripped threat, and my health just completely vanished. But moving on to the second boss now, it is Karazhan, the fearsome Hydra god himself. And I'm not entirely sure what his mechanics are, but the melee were all standing in front of the boss, so I kinda just copied them. I don't think that was the right thing to do though, because he kept spewing some kind of poison onto us. Didn't matter though, since we were able to take him down anyway. For his loot, he dropped the Ring of the Shadow Deeps and a badge of justice. The rest of the dungeon really wasn't that bad. We were able to clear it pretty peacefully. That was until we got towards the end of the dungeon and these Underbog lords were absolutely smacking the tank. But regardless of that, we were successful in reaching the final boss of the dungeon, the Black Stalker. Now, as far as this dungeon goes, I'm not a massive fan of this place. I'm just not huge into spaghetti monsters. However, I really like this guy. He's the perfect mix of goofy, in my opinion. As for the mechanics, he now spawns little ads that, according to the group, we were supposed to prioritize. So that's what I did, and we were successful in the end at taking him down. For his loot, he dropped 3 different pairs of pants. One for each leg, I guess. But that's not actually where we ended things, because we then backtracked a bit and went after the boss, Swamp Lord Muselek. And as a few of you pointed out in the first TBC video, I missed this guy out. But he's here now, and he was easily the hardest boss in the dungeon. He was freezing the entire group, and Claw the Bear was constantly charging at people and knocking them back. But of course, we got him down anyway, and his loot was the Arm Wraps of Disdain. And looking at these things, I thought they might actually be quite good for tanking, but in the end, I just ended up passing on it. But with the boss now dead, we had officially completed our 2nd ever heroic dungeon. So with a couple of heroic dungeon runs now under my belt, I decided to get to work on the 3rd heroic attunement, and I decided to head over and into the Shadow Labyrinth in order to grind out Lower City reputation. Now, like I said in the last video, the Lower City is going to be our most important reputation grind out of all of them, and that's because at some point we will need to go to Exalted so that we can purchase the Shapeshifter Signet. It is a ridiculously powerful ring that offers 25 agility, but more importantly 20 expertise, which is a brand new stat that reduces the chance that mobs will parry or dodge your attacks, kind of like a 2nd hit rating. But that's the end goal. For now, all I really wanted to do was hit Revered, so that we had a few more heroic dungeon options. Now, as far as the dungeons go, I think I've made it pretty clear that I don't particularly enjoy the Orkney dungeons. However, this one is definitely the best of them. The whole cultist and demon theme is way more my thing compared to the voidiness. And well, that was it. I spent the next like 5 hours doing nothing but spamming the Shadow Labyrinth. However, at some point I did switch from doing full runs over to doing rep runs, which basically just meant clearing up to the 2nd boss and then resetting, which proved to be way more efficient than trying to clear the entire thing. And in the end, I was successful in getting us to Revered with the Lower City, and I wasted 0 time and went straight to the NPC Nakodu, who sold me the Orkney key, and we are now attuned for the Orkney Heroics. So after seeing how hard hitting and difficult some of the heroic dungeons can be, I decided that it would be best to fill in the gear gaps with stuff from quests and in normal dungeons first. And first up on that list is the Cleft Hoof Hide Leggings. 30 strength, 30 agility, some hit, and some expertise. This thing is without a doubt the best legs for us right now. None of the other Pre-bis pieces come even close to these things. And lucky for us, they come from a simple questline inside of Blade's Edge Mountain. Now, coming here for the first time, I really didn't know what to expect, but it was really cool. I mean, just look at this. Poor guy clearly flew straight into this thing and impaled himself. So I flew down to this little settlement called Evergrove, and there are a crap ton of quests here, and I'm told that questing is actually a very good gold farming strategy, but that's for another time. For now, we just needed to get those legs. For the first quest, we actually had to turn in a quest item picked up from a mini boss. However, this guy also offers a quest to kill that exact mob, so why not do it at the same time, right? So I made the 30 seconds flight trip down to this ogre infested area and slayed the mob Dorgok, who of course dropped the item we needed to start the quest chain. So I took it back to Commander Stonewall, which sent us towards the center of the zone where we found the NPC Baron Sablemane, who was going to be our main quest giver for this chain. And he wanted us to bring him 7 Crustburster Venom Glands. And I assume they get their name because they really like doing that. It was a nice and simple task though, nothing too out of the ordinary. So I handed the quest into Baron Sablemane, and he now wanted us to steal a sack from a giant elite mob. This one was pretty interesting though. What we had to do was use a sleeping powder provided to us by the quest giver to put Gruul to sleep. We can then sneak in and steal the sack. It was a short quest, but different to the usual murder everything type of quest. The follow-up quest only wanted us to go back to Commander Stonewall, who then sent us over to the east for, again, a bit of a different type of quest. We had to plant a trap at the stone altar thingy, which attracted Gorgram the Dragon Killer, and it killed him. Awesome. So moving on to the last couple of quests now, it is of course elite quests. So with the help of the LFG tool, I was luckily able to find myself a couple of players to do it with. As far as elite quests go though, it really wasn't anything massively interesting. We had to kill 10 Bladespine Enforcers, 5 Battle Mages and 5 Ravagers, and finally a mini-boss called Fingrom. And the quest description said it was for 3 players, however we did it as 5 and it was an absolute breeze. I then handed the quest in and started up the final quest in the chain, and again it was another elite quest where we had to kill the scary mob Gawk, and he was absolutely smacking me, so we just let the NPC tank him instead and we were able to take him down. I then returned to the quest giver for the very last time, and just like that we had acquired our best in slot legs. So with our second piece of Pre-bis in hand, it was time for us to head into Mechanar Normal. So going into this one, again, I didn't really know what to expect. I was obviously thinking of some kind of mechanical theme due to the name, but I think the best way to describe it is crystal-y. But it's filled with blood elves and massive mechanical constructs, which I thought was pretty cool. Almost immediately after entering the dungeon, we are standing in front of what is technically a boss. There's 2 of these big guys, and whilst neither of them dropped any loot, they both have a chance at dropping either a blue jagged crystal or a red jagged crystal. And if you get one of each, you can combine them to make a key to unlock a chest for an extra piece of loot, which I think is a really cool idea. I like when there's optional things to do inside of dungeons, rather than it just being one straight path every single time. So whilst we are just clearing our way towards the first boss, the reason we are running this dungeon is purely because of our Pre-bis chest piece, the Tunic of Assassination. 28 agility, 54 attack power, and 3 gem slots. Gem slots are a really nice addition to gear pieces in my opinion. It really does add an extra bit of customization to your gear, especially for us. We could add agility if we want more crit, some hit maybe if we are still low, or hell, even stamina if I find myself getting smacked a bit too much. Plus it allowed them to add an entirely new profession to the game, which is always great. So moving on to the first boss now, it is Mechanolord Capacitus. Now as far as it goes, this was actually quite a tough fight, purely because I decided to go straight into the run without doing any research on mechanics. And turns out he has quite a similar mechanic as the first boss in Mana Tombs, where he has a spell reflect kind of thing that also reflects melee damage. Plus there was these floating balls that seem to randomly explode. For his loot, he dropped the Thorium Weave Cloak, a very tanky piece of gear. So I quickly checked Wowhead to see if it was good for bear tanking, and turns out it is pre-bis for mitigation. So of course, I needed on it, and we won. So even if we didn't get the chest we needed, we at least got something, right? So moving upstairs onto the second boss now is Nethermancer Sepethria. Again, another somewhat tough fight. She has these fire elementals which are constantly chasing one player around, which unsurprisingly was left up to the hunter to deal with. Other than that, she does like to stun select people every now and then, but overall, a pretty fun fight. For the loot, she dropped the one-handed axe Stellaris. So moving on into the next section now, this is a pretty annoying part of the dungeon, because throughout this entire hallway, you are constantly being ambushed by waves of mobs and you are kept in combat throughout, meaning you aren't allowed to drink up. But in the end of that hallway lies the last boss of the instance, Pathalion the Calculator. Some pretty weird sounding names in this dungeon, I can't lie, but he is of course the boss that can drop our beautiful new chest piece. His mechanics though, he didn't really do a whole lot. He spawned some ads that I initially started to take down, but everyone else was just attacking the boss. So I just did the exact same thing, and that was it. We had cleared our first ever run of Mechanar, and of course the chest piece in fact didn't drop. But that wasn't going to stop me, because over the next like day and a half, I would live inside Mechanar, running it over and over again in an attempt to get that chest piece. And let me tell you, this thing really didn't want to drop. I did an unbelievably large amount of runs in this dungeon. I don't even know how many runs I did because I just stopped counting at some point. But fast forward a day and a half and God knows how many runs, and finally the chest dropped. And of course it happened at a time that I wasn't recording. But regardless, I was still incredibly happy. So like I said earlier, in TBC there are now gem slots added to certain pieces of gear. Now originally, I thought it worked like a red slot had to be filled with a red gem and a blue slot had to be filled with a blue gem, etc. But turns out that's not true at all, and you can actually shove whatever gems you wanted into whatever slots you wanted. And sure, I wasn't currently hit capped, but I decided to shove 3 delicate living rubies into it to give us a massive 24 extra agility. And although it was like 300 gold, I still think it'll be worth it in the long run. So with a couple more pieces of pre-bis gear in hand, I decided that it was time to jump back into some heroic dungeons, and this time we are going after the slave pens. Truth be told, the only reason I was in here was because my guild leader asked if I wanted to come, and this ended up being a very unique experience, because most of the time when it comes to dungeons you just kill the mobs until you get to the end. However, we didn't do that. We avoided as many mobs as we possibly could. We actually only ended up killing these 2 mobs here. We then killed Menu the Betrayer and collected our badge. But as we got up top, we actually jumped off the bridge and down onto this little area, where we made an attempt to jump onto the ledge. However, me being me, I missed the jump, and I tried to charge the boss in bear form, but of course that didn't work. So I drowned myself, and luckily they were able to send me a res. And I think we attempted to soothe the mobs here and sneak past, but we ended up just having to kill them. But we make our way up and use this little hidey hole to let the patrol mobs past, and then sneak past the crabs and on to the final boss. Now, I'm not saying that this wasn't fun to do. In fact, it was very fun. It was just not what I expected when I got asked to come to the slave pens. But regardless, it's very quick to do, which means it's a nice and easy source of badges of justice. So the other thing that was constantly on my mind was of course the Karazhan attunement. And for the next part of it, we had to head over and into the Arcatraz. Now this one wasn't really much of a burden to do or anything, and that's because the normal version of this dungeon holds our pre-bis gloves, which are the gloves of the Unbound. 27 agility, 38 attack power, and 2 gem slots. They are the best non-hit gloves we have access to. The actual bis hit gloves are rather expensive, and I happen to be rather poor. So these are the ones I'll be going after. As far as the dungeon goes though, it felt incredibly similar to Mechanar, with all the crystal stuff and big constructs, except this one was a wee bit more focused on demons and stuff, which I've said in the past I much prefer. Moving on to the first boss now, it is this big void guy called Zeraketh the Unbound. Now unfortunately, whilst this group were very friendly, the tank we had just could not hold threat to save his life. And I'm not being unreasonable here, right? I mean, I really shouldn't have to spam cower whilst doing 300 DPS. And for whatever reason, he just did not want to give anyone Blessing of Salvation. We asked for it at least 3 or 4 times. But regardless, we pressed on anyway, until we were at the next boss, Delia the Doomslayer. She's a succubus type of thing with 6 arms and an interesting appearance. Her mechanic was a very simple whirlwind ability. I mean, if I had 6 arms, I would probably want to spin uncontrollably as well. For her loot, she ended up dropping a fist weapon called Reflex Blades. I've always found it kind of weird that I'm able to equip these kinds of things, because why would I put claws on my claws? But after taking her down, we actually move straight into the next boss, Wrathscryre Socothrates. And this is the boss that can drop our amazing Pre-bis gloves. And he was also quite a fun fight. He had this dash ability which leaves behind a flaming trail of fell fire, and as a classic player, my first instinct is to jump straight into said fire, but I resisted that urge and we were able to take him down. And what do I see? 1 Gloves of the Unbound. So although we had a terrible tank, we managed to get the Karazhan quest done and our Pre-bis gloves. So at this point, I really didn't care what happened. So we make our way over to the final boss, Harbinger Skyrus. Now, I thought this was a really cool boss. From my understanding, he controls these prison cells which hold some of Outland's most powerful creatures, such as the man himself, Millhouse Manastorm. And to my understanding, this was the first time Millhouse Manastorm had made an appearance, so this was really cool to see. But the mobs themselves were actually giving us quite a bit of issue, because again, myself and the priest had aggro, which could have been prevented if we had salvation, and obviously that caused us to wipe. And after respawning, the tank then rage quit on us. And of course we did give it a go as a 4-man, but I didn't have any of my tanking gear on me at the time, and in the end it just wasn't enough. So although it was a shame for the rest of the group, at least we got what we needed done. So after a very lucky Arcatraz run, it was once again time to head into some heroic dungeons, and we were going back to the Black Morass. To be honest, it wasn't really my choice. I was invited by the main character of last week's video, Mr. Schlong. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail because at this point we've done this dungeon a minimum of 50 times, but it was an incredibly smooth run. Mr. Schlong is not only a fantastic player, but has some of the best gear for only the second week of TBC. We had absolutely 0 issues on the first boss and the second boss. No trinket, by the way. And again, we all decided to pop free action potions on the final boss, which just made it an absolute breeze. But remember, this boss drops what we are here for, the Girdle of the Death Dealer. It is the most important piece of dungeon loot for us since it is base until phase 2. Even then, in phase 2 it's like the 3rd best option. But we get Aeonis down and there it was. Staring right back at me was our phase 1 best in slot belt. And I was the only person rolling on it. I was so incredibly happy getting our Pre-bis gloves and then getting our phase 1 base belt an hour later. I'm sure you can imagine how that felt. But not only that, we had now amassed 15 total badges of justice. And sure, that doesn't seem like very much, but I decided to already cash them in on possibly the biggest piece of loot for us, and that is none other than the Everbloom Idol. Considering the fact that Shred is like 40% of our damage, being able to add 88 to that is absolutely insane. It's so insane that it is the best in slots for the entire of the Burning Crusade, and for only 15 badges, I'd say money well spent. The next thing that I decided to work on was getting our best in slot ring, and like I said earlier, that is the Shapeshifter's Signet. Now luckily, we were already revered, so we really didn't have that much left to do, and this wasn't something that I sat and grinded for hours and hours. It's more something I passively did over a couple days every time I had a spare half hour, and it was pretty much never full runs, mostly rep runs which just go up to the second boss and then reset, which in total would get like 1500 to 2000 rep every run. So after 2 days of doing that, I did manage to get us to Exalted level with the lower city. So of course, I wasted no time and rushed over to Nakodu and picked up our brand new ring. And the other thing is that I finally managed to scrape together enough gold to purchase our Pre-bis weapon, and that is the Staff of Natural Fury. for the low price of 1200 gold. Now the interesting thing about this weapon is that obviously it gives us a stupidly large amount of attack power, but also it reduces the mana cost of our shape-shifting abilities by 200. And sure, we will definitely be replacing this thing in the near future. However, this weapon is in constant use throughout TBC for those really long fights. So 100% a worthy purchase. So now that we are pretty stacked on pre-bis gear, all we really had left to do now was to run heroic dungeons for those last few pieces of loot. However, as many of you know, during the launch of TBC, there was an armor bug that made pretty much all mobs have way less armor than they should have, and in turn, I was doing way more damage than I should have been. And now that that is fixed, no one wants to invite a cat to their group, and I stood in Shatrath for way over an hour spamming people wanting to do dungeons, and I couldn't tank it either, since at this point my tanking gear was way outdated. But I did manage to find a solution. Introducing Linfaro. He is a good friend of mine, and he has offered to tank some heroic dungeons for me, and first stop is Heroic Dunhold. Now like I said in the previous video, the heroic version of this dungeon is also a very important one, and that is because of the Nightfall wrist guards. And sure, these don't offer any hit, but the stats on these are just so good that they are also best in slot for the entire of phase 1. So as far as the dungeon goes, the heroic version really wasn't any different than the normal version, except everything hits a lot harder. So we managed to kill Lieutenant Drake no issues, and then freed Thrall from his prison cell. Captain Scarlock on the other hand was a little bit more scary, because on normal, his consecration doesn't really do that much, and you could probably just stand in it as long as you want. However, on heroic, his consecration is the scariest part, and standing in it for more than a couple seconds can definitely mean death. For his loot, he dropped Dath Rohan's ceremonial hammer. Now I know this is a healing piece of gear, but according to Linfaro, this is really good for us in PvP, so I needed on it, which no one else seemed to mind. We then traverse through Dunhold and clear up the Tyron Mill lookouts and move on to the final encounter. Now lucky for me, I was actually very useful in this situation, because these dragon guys hit extremely hard. However, my sleep ability does work on them. But eventually, Epoch Hunter comes down, and to be honest, he felt like the easiest boss out of the three, and we managed to get him down. And on the very first run, what do I see? Nightfall bracers. I couldn't believe it. Me getting a piece of loot on the very first run? That is unheard of. And at this point, all we actually needed to be full pre-bis was a ring, shoulders, neck, and trinket. The second dungeon we went into was the heroic Black Morass, because it's right next to Dunhold, but also because Linfaro was full pre-bis except for the belt from here. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but it was an absolute breeze, because Linfaro at the time had, I think, 19,000 armor. Dude was an actual meat wall. Unfortunately though, we get Aeonis down, and sadly there was no belt for my boy. For the third and final dungeon, we decided to do heroic Auchenai Crypts, and that's because our pre-bis shoulders come from here, and that is the Waste Walker shoulder pads. And sure, the intention behind this piece of gear I am almost certain was for rogues to use it. However, stat wise, this piece of gear alone is miles better than anything else. As far as the dungeon goes though, this one was actually a bit difficult. Fidgety is a good word to use for it, because there wasn't a massive amount of mobs everywhere, but the ones that were here hit stupidly hard, plus they all love to spawn in these smaller elite mobs. Moving on to the first boss now is Shirak the Dead Watcher. So he doesn't gain any new abilities or anything, but his damage is just jacked up an insane amount. Throughout the entire fight, his bite ability just kept going and going. It felt almost like it was a clock, slowly ticking away at your health bar. But regardless, we were successful at getting him down. And moving on now to what is possibly the most annoying trash mobs in the entire game, and I'm still not 100% sure on how these guys work. It's like they can't be tanked or something like that anyway. So we clear up the massive skeleton packs no bother and move on to the final boss, Exarch Maladar. Now during the normal version, I said it would be cool if the second boss also dropped a piece of loot. Well, in the heroic version, he does, and that is where our shoulders come from. But we get him down, and sadly no shoulders. But you know what? I can't really complain, since we did manage to get our best in slot bracers from Dunhold. So doing these 3 heroic dungeons kinda became our little daily routine. Every day Linfaro would take me into some heroic dungeons, and honestly I can't thank him enough, because there was just no way I would have been making any progress without him. On day number 2, Aeonis again didn't want to drop his belt for my friend, and Exarch Maladar didn't drop the shoulders for me. Day number 3 was unfortunately the same story for Linfaro. As for Exarch Maladar though, we get him and his ugly transparent friend down, and the shoulders finally dropped, which means all we need now is a trinket, ring, and neck piece. As for our rings, the best one would actually come from a boss inside of Manitombs called Yor, and it is the Shafar's Band of Brutality. However, turns out Yor is a boss that actually needs to be summoned, and it was unlikely that anyone would be doing that this early into TBC. So our next best option was the Overseer's Signet, which luckily we would be able to get by simply completing a questline in Netherstorm. And first up on that short list of quests was killing some Sun Fury Blood Elves. Now I believe doing this questline was actually my first time questing in Netherstorm, and I gotta say, not a huge fan. It has the same voidy crystalliness that we've seen quite a lot so far. It's just not really my type of thing, which is fine because TBC has so many different aesthetics and it would be silly if I liked every single one of them, right? The quest itself was quite a chill one, nothing more than a simple kill quest. I did however watch this mage obliterate a giant pack of mobs that he pulled. So I handed the quest in at area 52, which then sent us over to a big crystallized building, where all we had to do was turn in and accept the quest, which then wanted us to shut down whatever this big piece of technology is. All we actually had to do was guard it from these Sun Fury attackers for a couple minutes, and the next 2 quests were literally exact copies of this one, and the third and final quest was also the exact same, except it was an elite version. So I teamed up with a nearby shaman, and together we fought back the hordes of these gremlin things. I then returned to area 52, and we have now acquired our Pre-bis ring. So apart from that, all we really needed to do now was get a trinket and neck piece. And well, I was so close to getting the 41 badges of justice that we needed for the Bloodlust brooch, and luckily Mr. Tyan once again invited me back for a skip run of the slave pens, which would be enough. And it wasn't anything massively exciting, just the usual 20 minutes in and out type of stuff. But excitedly, I rushed my way back to Shattrath City and paid a visit to Geras. He sold me our Pre-bis trinket. So all we really had to do now was get ourselves a neck piece of some kind. However, that will have to wait for another video. Tonight is raid night, and for our first ever TBC raid, we were heading balls deep into Gruul's lair. Now this one, and Magtheridon's lair, is very much like Anixia's lair from vanilla, because there's only one big bad scary boss in each of them. Well, except for Gruul's lair, because there's actually 2 of them. And the first one is Mulgar. This is a pretty interesting one, because Mulgar comes with, I believe, 4 adds that all need to be tanked. We've got a mage tanking, warlocks enslaving, a bunch of stuff that I didn't understand. And originally, I was supposed to be tanking one of these guys, but in the end, the raid leaders just said, nuke the boss. Now, the way we did this boss, I don't think was the intended way, because what we did was completely ignore Mulgar's ads and just nuked him as much as possible, because everyone wanted to get the best parse they possibly could. However, I completely messed mine up. I was just too nervous going into it, and I completely ruined my rotation. As for soft reserves, we all get 2 soft reserves across both Gruul's lair and Magtheridon, and I put both of them into the tier tokens for the chest and shoulder. Yes, I couldn't believe it either. Feral druids actually have a tier set this time. Plus they are both the best stat wise, so even if it didn't have the set bonus stapled to it, chances are they would still be bis. So moving on now to the big bad boss of the raid, Gruul the Dragon Slayer, and this time I was determined to actually parse well. And well, surprisingly, shockingly, I was the top DPS. Can you believe it? Unfortunately, people were asking for innervates whilst being a million miles away from me, people were dying and needed battle resed, and in the end, it completely messed up my parse. Also, no DST. So moving on to Magtheridon now, for this raid, I was completely banned from parsing, because I was assigned to tank one of the ads, in full agility cat gear. And well, everything was starting to feel quite laggy, and basically the second Magtheridon came online, my internet decided that this was a perfect time to start an update. But I came back, and luckily was still alive and was able to finish the fight with a massive 89 parse. But getting to the most exciting part now, rolling on the loot. And I didn't notice at the time, but the tier token for our shoulders did in fact drop, and I managed to get a massive 25 roll. Moving on now to the big one, and of course, it was Karazhan. And I can't lie, it felt a little weird, because unlike any of the raids I've ever done, this was a 10-man raid. It felt a lot like I was heading in for a UBRS run. And unfortunately for me, I was banned from parsing in this raid because I was off tanking in full agility cat gear. And whilst we are just clearing out the cellar, let's talk a little bit about soft reserves. Firstly, the gloves of dexterous manipulation. Yes, I too thought gloves of deafness would be bis, but no, turns out these things are. Secondly, the Edgewalker long boots. These boots are by far the best option we have access to, for both stats and for hit. And lastly, these Skulker's greaves. These legs are so unbelievably good. They are bis all of phase 1 and 2, and are still pretty decent in phase 3, so definitely one of the most important pieces of loot. So with all that out of the way, it's time for the first boss of Karazhan, Attunement the Huntsman. Now, like I said before, I was indeed banned from parsing because I had to off-tank. But to be honest, I don't think I was needed at all. I barely held threat from Tyan. Very excitingly though, we get him down and his mount dropped on the first week. This must have been a world first, right? Now, I just gotta say, Karazhan as a whole was so awesome. I loved this aesthetic, killing undead and ghosts in a haunted castle. I mean, there was even like skeletal waiters and shit. That's like the perfect mix of goofy but cool. But moving on to the second boss now, it is Morass. This is a very important boss for us, because he can drop both gloves of dexterous manipulation and Edgewalker long boots. However, things didn't really go to plan on the first pull. A few people died right off the bat, and I genuinely don't think I'm tanky enough for this. So of course, we ended up wiping, but on the second attempt, I was told just to swipe the ads as much as possible, which apparently worked because we were able to get it down. For the loot, neither of the pieces we wanted dropped. The next 10 minutes was a really big ad clearing section, where we also stopped off inside of this room to pick up some kind of book, which I believe was for the Nether Spike questline. But eventually, we did make our way onto the third boss, Maiden of Virtue, and I was luckily able to parse on this boss. And while the first boss I was allowed to DPS on was in fact my first 100 parse of TBC. Now granted, it didn't last very long. I think it was less than 4 hours later someone else had already parsed better than me, but it was still cool at the time. For the fourth boss, it was the Opera event. This was a bit of a strange one because it is one of, I think, 3 different bosses that can spawn. It's a cool idea though, being up on stage in front of tens of ghostly visitors, but again, I really don't think I was needed to tank on this boss. Tyan could easily solo tank this, I think. And the reason I know that is because I didn't get threat once. For the fifth boss of the raid, it is this big construct guy called the Curator. This one felt a little out of place because there was a giant construct in what is supposed to be a haunted castle. No complaints though, he was still pretty cool, and I thought I was supposed to be tanking these little ads that spawned, but looking back on that now, I honestly don't think I was supposed to. But even then, I was still the top DPS and managed to get a 99 parse. It feels really weird to say that, to be honest, because in vanilla we barely ever got close to the top of the DPS meter. So clearing our way through the library now, there is a really cool little mechanic in here, and that's the books that can spawn. They are consumable items that give a load of different stats. I think some of them give spell hit and crits, extra armor and damage, stuff like that. And sure, they aren't massively impactful, I don't think, but I like when there's small things like this inside of instances. So moving on now is the sixth boss, and it is Terrestrian Ilhoof. Now he's also quite a big one for us because he can actually drop Terestian's Strangle Staff, our actual best in slot weapon. And the reason I didn't SR it is because we are the only druid, so if it dropped, it would automatically go to us. Doesn't matter anyway because it never even dropped. Basically, right around the corner from Ilhoof is the 7th boss, Shade of Aran. Now I won't lie, I went into this raid having done zero research on mechanics, and well, I was told to just pick up one of the ads. However, my stupid ass decided that it would be an amazing idea to charge straight into one of the boss's blizzards. I'm telling you man, I'm really not cut out for this tanking business. But regardless, the boys were able to take a run down, and we moved on over to the second last boss of the instance, Netherspite. Now at the time, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I was told to stand in the green beam on the first phase, which went fine, but on the second phase, I was told to stand in the red beam, which I believe causes you to take 100% aggro. Despite me having only 4000 armor, it actually went okay, I think. All I got back when I asked how I did was, "You did fine, cat." But of course, since it is me playing this game, our Skulker's Greaves didn't drop. Now, when it comes to doing new raids and stuff, I quite often say no idea what was going on, which is true because I don't like doing mechanics research. But imagine my confusion when we started playing chess. Genuinely, not a clue what was going on. Even now, weeks later when we do this boss, I don't know what to do. I just find the nearest thing and start swinging, which apparently works quite well because the boys were able to take it down. But just upstairs from that lies the last boss of the instance, Prince Malchezaar. Now this is a name that I actually knew because I've heard stories of how Prince Malchezaar somehow got Gorehowl, which I believe is an axe that was wielded by Gromosh and then Thrall and then Garrosh. So it was really cool to actually see this guy in person. The fight itself really wasn't that difficult though, and we were able to take him down with 0 deaths. Now of course, there is another boss in the raid, Nightbane, which is a boss that needs to be summoned. However, that is a story for another video. But for now, it is time for us to roll on the loot. And first off, the Worgen Claw Necklace. Despite my add-on telling me that it's the 4th best for ferals, it's almost identical to our Bis hit neck. And remember, the next piece is the only part we needed to upgrade, so this would be absolutely massive for us. So I hit main spec and got a huge 4 roll. But hey, maybe we still win on the mount. I mean, I'd much prefer that, but unfortunately, I rolled 57, losing to a 93 roll. So congrats to Fuminori. But you know what? Despite getting literally 0 loot from this raid, it was honestly such a cool raid and fun raid to do. This might actually be my favorite so far, despite it being just a 10-man. So overall, I would say that this is a fantastic way to kick off the Burning Crusade. I hope you all enjoyed today's video because I enjoyed making it. Our first TBC raid. I genuinely could not be happier with them. They are so much fun to do, and of course I've been raiding every single week since the raids opened. And one thing I really want to do this time around is do loads of druid videos. I have so much fun being able to share the druid journey, and these videos are genuinely my favorite ones to make. And I know that during vanilla we would only do a druid video every like 2 to 3 months when a big patch releases, I guess. But I'd love to be able to do one like every month or so. So let me know what you guys think of that. I can say with full confidence though that the next video will be a hunter video because I've decided to actually play an alt this time, and I'm pretty sure I want to alt a survival hunter, or maybe a fury warrior. I don't really know yet. There's just so much stuff to do. Anyway, I think that is enough yapping for today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all later.